Hello YouTubers, today, as you can tell from the title, we're talking about the British Rowing November Trials. Not just that it's a 2k erg and a 5k row, but we're going more in depth, and later on we're going to talk about some tips that I've learned over doing the trials themselves multiple times, especially for the 5k row. So, first things first, where are the trials? For those of you that don't know, it's in Boston. And that's Boston, Lincolnshire, not Boston, Massachusetts, where I actually went to university. But for me, from Henley, it's about a 3-hour drive, and that in itself poses a couple of problems. And we're probably quite lucky that it's only a 3-hour drive. I know a lot of people from further away in Britain have to drive a lot further. So when you are driving to a big event, driving to a big race, you obviously have to sit still in the car for quite a long time. So there are a few things you can actually do when you're in the car itself to help your body sort of keep moving. Obviously you can't go a run or whatever in the car, but things like having a tennis ball or a lacrosse ball or some sort of ball that you can put under a hamstring or a glute or on the chair behind you, and just using that to sort of massage yourself when you're in the car and when you're actually driving. Limiting the stints of driving to a couple of hours so you can get out and walk around, and so you don't get too stiff when you're sitting in the car. Obviously, this will add time to the overall journey time, but it's a fine balance between driving for a long time without brakes and becoming really stiff, or driving for shorter stints and not becoming as stiff, especially when you're about to go race in the next day or so. It can make a big impact just having the body move that little bit. So we've driven from, for me, Henley to Boston. Usually we get there on the Friday, we'll rig the boats up and we'll go for a small paddle. This is also to get the drive out of the legs, so I really recommend, if you do have enough time, if you get there early enough, going for a paddle. For one, the biggest thing, to get rid of that drive in the legs, but two, also, if you haven't been on the course itself, you can take this opportunity to go up to the start line and have a little look. But obviously the start line is about 5k away, so maybe 10k is a bit much for the paddle if it's the day before. So it still gets you seeing the course if you go for 2k or so, and that is a big thing if you have never been on the course itself. So travel days, using all the tips you know and recovering right and fueling right on that travel day can really have an impact on the Saturday and Sunday. So moving on to the Saturday itself, you have 2k day. So hopefully you've had a good journey, you're rested, you're recovered, and you're ready to do a big 2k. And usually roughly 10:45 is the start of the ergs, and that is the case this year. So the first wave is at 10:45 with the men, and it's all done in alphabetical order. So you can kind of figure out what time you'll be depending on your last name. So for me, since my second name begins with B, I usually am in the first wave. But it also depends on the timings. Sometimes the men go first, sometimes the women go first. But this year, the men are going first at 10:45, and the last wave is at 4 o'clock this year. So there's many people doing their 2k, and that is one thing, a big tip. So no matter if you're at 10:45 or 12 or 2 or even at 4 o'clock, plan on your recovery post 2k. So you're all going to go out there and smash that 2k. But it is not just all about the 2k itself. There's also another race to do on the Sunday. So you really have to make sure that post 2k that you get enough fuel in, because remember, food is fuel, but also not sitting around too much, not being too stationary post erg. So in the evening, maybe go a little walk. So again, you can sort of keep the body moving and keeping it on its toes and ready to go for the next part of the assessment, which is the 5k row. Obviously there's a big difference between doing a 2k at 10:45 and then another piece in the next morning versus doing an erg at 4 o'clock and doing one the next morning as well. So you really have to make sure that if you are one of those later ergs, that you're being really efficient with your time and really efficient with your recovery, so that you are ready to go on the next day. But usually you'll have roughly the same amount of time between your 2K and your 5K row. It just means that if you're later on the Saturday, you'll probably be later on the Sunday. So moving on to the 5K row on the Sunday, which you can only actually do if you make a certain time on your 2K on the Saturday. For the heavyweight men, the cutoff is 6:05, and then it can vary depending on female, male, or if you're FISU eligible, and that just means if you've been to university or you're at university, you can race the FISU World Championship, so the World University Games, or of course race for your university as well. So the FISU cutoffs are just a little bit slower than the other cutoffs themselves, but they range from 6:05 for the men and around 7 minutes for the women. But obviously, depending on your category, the times can be different. So why are the first British rowing trials of the year held in Boston, Lincolnshire? Well, that's because there are many canals around the area which are generally quite straight, and it's a 5K race. So there are not many places in Britain where you can have 5K of a straight course, or roughly straight course, to do a 5K time trial to get roughly consistent results all the way down the track. Now, moving on to some tips for the 5K row itself. Tip number 1, pacing. Pacing is absolutely massive. Obviously, I talk about that quite a lot, and having the plans together and making sure you know your splits can be huge. But in this 5K row, it can be even more critical because it's 5K, it's that little bit longer, but also the stream can be quite strong. So you need to be able to know more the effort of what you should be putting in, not necessarily the splits that you should be seeing, because with the stronger stream, generally you'll be going down the course at splits that you might not really have thought that you could do for 5 entire K. So you really want to judge the pacing on yourself, on how you're feeling, rather than the splits you're seeing, because I've went down the course before and thought, oh my goodness, we're going to break the world record, but in reality everyone was doing that because the stream was so strong. And that brings us into tip number 2, know the course. I mentioned that the course is generally quite straight. It is wide, but it is not a dead straight course. There's quite a wide bend after about 2K to bow side or starboard side, and then you go, it's about roughly the K, 1250, back to stroke side or back to port. But that first turn, people can really mess up. There are marshals around to try and help you and correct your course if it is going wrong, but I wouldn't really depend on them, and just make sure, or try to make sure, that your course is the correct one to take. So which course should you take? You want to stick to the middle as much as possible because, like I said, the stream can be really, really strong. So the stream itself is strongest in the middle of the river. So by sticking to the middle of the river, you will be getting that strongest piece of water. So even on the bend, you don't want to cut too much in because you will lose speed off the stream. But then again, you don't want to go wide because you will end up in the bank on stroke side. And that's what people generally do. You forget how sharp that bend is. It's not necessarily a big turn, it's more of a sweeping turn, so it lasts quite a while rather than if you just bang on the rudder for a little bit and you'll be done. No, just make sure when you are off the rudder and you have a little look behind you that you are pointed down the middle of the course. You don't want to think you're done, turn round and then be right in a tree, which I have unfortunately both been on the bow side bank or the starboard side bank and the port side or the stroke side bank as well, with some errors in judgment on the steering. I thought I could cut the corner a bit much and I cut it too far. There's also on the bow side or starboard side, there is a little dock and a buoy or a buoy, so you want to avoid that. So you don't want to cut the corner too much on this side, and then again, if you take it too wide, it's quite difficult to turn in and you end up in the bank. So hopefully that helps. Definitely know the course for tip number 2. And tip number 3, this one is really an obvious one, but for those of you that haven't been to trials before or haven't done a lot of racing, it is wearing the right kit. And what do I mean by that? Well, obviously you want to be warm going up to the start line. Generally around Boston, around November time, it is quite chilly, so you want to wrap up nice and warm so you are warmed up for the race itself. But then by the time you get to the start line, you're warmed up, you're ready to go, you don't generally want to race in all of that kit. So I usually go up to the start line in a short sleeve, a long sleeve, a jacket, a hat, and maybe another long sleeve depending if it is really cold or if it's just pretty cold. And then on the race itself, I'll take everything off bar the short sleeve. So taking quite a lot of kit off, but knowing that when you do go down the course, when you're giving it full yam and smashing it down the course, you're going to warm up again. So have confidence that, yeah, you might be a little bit cooler at the start line, but once the body gets going and once you're really going down the course, you will warm up. But then at the same time, there's a fine line between taking some kit off, taking your long sleeve off, taking your jacket off, and being too cold at the start line before you start, and then also being too warm in the race itself. So you know yourself when you've done a piece and you've been too warm, you've got too much kit on, or you've been too cold. So make a judgment yourself, but that's just a little bit of planning that can be really important to make just that little bit of a difference going down the course. If you're too cold to start, it can cause a little bit of trouble going off the start and getting into a good rhythm. If you're too hot down the course, it can cause more stress on the body and thinking that you're actually trying harder than you actually are. So then it can make you feel more tired and perhaps burn that bit more energy and end up going a little bit slower. So it does sound obvious, the ideal temperature is ideal, but making sure you plan for that and don't think, oh my goodness, I need to start now, I've not taken all my kit off, and just race in like 6 layers. Give it time at the start line to, when they say go, you're ready to go in the right kit. So generally we'll listen to the people going before and say, okay, there's 2 people or person before we go, and then we'll start to take the kit off and then get ready to go. And that will be it for today's episode, Yam Squad. Hopefully you enjoyed a little bit of tips and a little bit of information for those that didn't know what the November trials entailed. And those 3 tips hopefully will help. It's really important to pace yourself and know what pace you need to do going down the course. Not necessarily on the split, but more on the feeling of the pace itself. Knowing the course and really sticking to the middle, very, very important. And the last one, wearing the right kit, very, very important. So 3 tips, if you stick to all those, you'll have a little bit more of an advantage and you'll have a better chance of doing very well. And as always, Yam Squad, remember to subscribe if you haven't already, hit that like button, and I'll see you in the next episode.